come out here to CoPart in Bristol to film an interesting R230 SL. At CoPart, he's a general manager here. The site manager's very kindly come to let us a look around this beauty here. Now, this is a 2008 R230, and what makes this slightly special is that most of the R230s you'll get at CoPart will be the earlier versions, and most of you will know this already, but in 2006 they did a facelift on this car with the newer lower grills, etc. So one of the things to bear in mind if you're thinking of buying one of these cars, especially if you were going to rebuild this car as opposed to breaking it, after 2006 you're going to need different style of bumpers, and they are quite difficult to come by. So as part of the facelift, this got a new engine, a slightly upgraded engine. Now, the cubic capacity of the engine was actually slightly less than the previous version, but the car itself was more powerful. One thing to be aware of, when these cars were upgraded and had the new engine, the early models did suffer from the balance shift sprocket wearing out. There is a website, I'll leave the link below, where you can put the VIN number of the car and to see if your car is potentially affected by that. This is a later car, so these cars didn't suffer so much from that problem. I've already checked the VIN number against the website, but they did potentially suffer from some of the solenoids leaking, but that is a far less serious issue to fix than the balance sprocket, which would entail engine out, which on this particular car simply wouldn't be worth it. If you're ever thinking of buying an R230, a 350 SL, and you're attracted to the 350 because it doesn't have the problematic or potentially problematic ABC suspension, just be warned that some of the 350s did actually have ABC as an option. This particular one doesn't. If it did have that as an option, you'd see the ABC tank just here. On the 2006 facelift model on the 350 SL, one of the things they did was include this nice metal embossed piece here. The leather was slightly different and softer. You had different interior options on the car in terms of color. This is pretty standard color here, but you had thing that came with the 2006 facelift was the 7-speed gearbox as opposed to the 5-speed. Some of the options to look for on these cars are things like the panoramic roof. Now, this has the lovely panoramic roof here, but obviously it has the later stereo system. Now, in terms of the damage on this car here, if I was buying this car to repair it myself, I'd be looking at this and thinking, okay, I'm potentially going to need a new bumper here, although you might actually be able to repair this bumper. You'd need potentially a new bumper, and the grills on these cars are readily available as well. You might need to get some cross bracing, and without taking the light out, it'd be impossible to see what's going on behind there. But in terms of chassis or frame damage on this car, I don't think there is any. The actual wing itself looks fine. There's a tiny little dent in there which I think you could pull out, but I don't think the wing is actually pushed in at all, and I think the bonnet is absolutely fine as well on this car. Definitely a new light here. These lights are readily available from breakers yards. There's actually a guy in Tewkesbury that specializes in breaking these called Dave, and he will have things like these lights. At any one time, he's got 1 or 2 of these in stock. Be a problem. In fact, the damage on this car, I would say, is pretty light. And a really interesting thing about this particular model, apart from it's one of the later ones, is that it still has an MOT till June next year. The alloys here are a little bit scuffed up, but these are pretty easy to refurbish. It's going to cost you about £400 or £500 to refurbish the alloys if you wish to do so. One of the problems on these cars, especially the earlier ones, they have steel rear quarters here. The rest of the car is aluminium and magnesium, but these wheel arches tend to rust out. Now, this one here is absolutely fine. It has a few little dings down here, but nothing serious. You can get the wheel arches done. Once again, it's about £400 or £500, sorry, about £200 to £400 depending on how bad they are. Now, this particular car is listed as boot not opening. Shane has just told me that his boss actually managed to get the boot open using the key, and what had happened is this handle was jammed forward, the spring and the handle has gone, but now that we've got the boot open, one of the things, if you were thinking of buying these cars, would be to actually check in the back of the boot. Once again, I can see that that's not a standard Mercedes battery, so that's obviously been changed. I can also see that the PSE pump has got the cover missing off it, which I imagine is why the roof isn't working, because by the looks of it, somebody's had a look inside here before. But these PSE pumps are available, and sometimes if your car has actually got moisture in the boot, which this one has, it's not uncommon, because if you look at the actual rubber seals on this car, you can see that they haven't been replaced. And what happens when it rains is you get moisture dripping in here, running down, and eventually going into the boot. So I don't know how well you can see that, but you just have a little bit of moisture in there, and the connections in the PSE pump tend to get corroded as a result. So if you were ever thinking of buying one of these, even if you've got one of these, my advice would go along to the SL guys and buy yourself one of these hatches and cut a hole through the lining there and put an inspection hatch in, because you need to inspect that battery control module. On this particular car, the consumer battery is flat as a pancake, which is probably why the roof isn't working, but it could also be an indication that there's a problem with the BCM. Sometime around 2008, the battery control module, or BCM, was revised. The surface mounted capacitors were changed or moved, and the MOSFETs, etc., all upgraded. This here is one of the later revised units. Now, if you were exceptionally lucky, you might find, if you bought this car, that it actually had one of these inside it. These will cost you anywhere between £1,500 to £2,000 for one of the later revised versions. And just out of interest, I'll just put the two alongside each other. Both of the ones in the next video shot are both the 1045 models, but one's a later version and one's an earlier 2004 version. Now, sometime in 2008 or later, the battery control module, or BCM, was upgraded and the surface mounted capacitors were moved and changed. So this here is a look at one of the upgraded boards, and alongside it is the non-upgraded board. Another one of the cosmetic changes they made in the 2006 facelift was the rear lights. You can see that they now have that grey stripe in them, which is similar to the SL55s, the AMG models of that car. So it's definitely repairable. And even if you're just buying this car for breaking it, for example, if you wanted to upgrade one of the SL55s to coilovers as opposed to the ABC, you would be taking the springs, the pump, the sway bars and everything off one of these cars and doing that, which is one of the reasons why excuse me, this car is quite a valuable car just in terms of the parts. But in actual fact, I would say this car looks to be far too nice to actually break, and was potentially a car that somebody could do up. So if people come to CoPart and they buy a car that's actually runs and drives like this, obviously this isn't taxed, but it is MOT, can they drive it away?
Yeah, so we always advise all our members to collect on a proper transporter.
Like a trailer or something?
Yeah, so, but we're always helpful in trying to make sure that the members collect their car at their reasonable time and leisure. So yeah, we do allow members to drive the vehicles away, but under their own discretion. We highly advise that they bring appropriate transportation.
It is important, if you're buying a crash damaged car like this, especially if you're buying something like one of these Mercedes, that you do as much research as you possibly can. I know there's limited research you can do at CoPart, but you can get a virtual viewing and you can get somebody to go around and look at the things that you want to or need to look at. And CoPart will do everything that they can to sort of let you know things like the roof are working, etc. It's always worth putting the registration or VIN of the car into one of the free checkers just to see what the MOT history of the car is. Now, this car's got an excellent MOT history. Some of the failures were the tyres, so I imagine when you go around this car here and look at the tyres, bearing in mind you can spend £1,000 plus on a set of tyres for one of these cars. These tyres all look pretty new, so if you were buying this with a view to doing it up, refurbishing it, one huge benefit was that you'd be getting a new set of tyres. Pretty new. If you you do want to become a member of CoPart, there's a one-off fee of £100, and that is reduced when you renew it. To buy a car at CoPart, you can pay a buyer's fee depending on how many cars you buy each year. You can see that the price is lower for the more cars you buy. So, for example, for a car around £2,000, you're going to pay something like £340. In addition to the buyer's fee, there's a bidding fee depending on whether you bid before the auction or whether you bid live online. There is a standard lot retrieval fee of £50 and a whole bunch of avoidable fees. As a member of CoPart, you can use the total cost calculator, and you can see if you bid £2,000 on this particular car, your total cost would come out at £2,574. £1,000 bid would cost you £3,676. The higher the value of the car, the lower the percentage of the bid fee. So on a £5,000 bid, you'd be paying around 15% as opposed to 20% on a lower value car.